Good morning, everyone. Thank you for showing up. I know it was a wild night last night. Thank you again for inviting me, especially it's an honor to be here for the 10th anniversary of Dev.Play. So it's been very cool to be here. This is going to be more of an inspirational talk. I've been in the industry for quite a while now. For 32 years, as I will explain in a moment here. And so basically, I titled it The 5 Keys Lessons I've Learned. It's not only 5, there's a lot more than 5, but you can only fit so many lessons in 45 minutes, right? So I decided, why not just make it 5, and we'll go from there. So to give you a sense of my background, I am a geographer who's been working in the game industry for 32 years. These are some of the numbers that define me, although the numbers alone don't define me. But yeah, I've been around a long time, started in this industry 32 years ago. I've been 20 years self-employed. I worked at Microsoft for 13 years. I ran the International Game Developers Association for 5 years and ran the Global Game Jam for 3 years, and I'm still on the board of the Global Game Jam. I have worked on 297 games. Actually, it's 298 as of this morning when I checked my email. So I'm about to start a new project with one of my clients, which is an unannounced thing. So it's been a lot of work over the years. And these are some of the games I've worked on. You might recognize some of the titles. I've worked on a lot of these franchises over the many years. It's been very busy. I mean, there's been a lot of fun in there. Some of the key projects that are close to my heart, like Indiana Jones of the Great Circle, because I'm a huge Indiana Jones geek. So that was just a real joy to work on that. But I'll mention that a bit later. What I've been doing in this industry, what I call culturalization work, which I'll explain a bit later, it's basically exploring this interaction between what is real, which is the geography outside these walls, and then what is represented. So what do we actually put into our game worlds, and how do we show culture and environments and everything, whether it's fantasy or real world, and then how is it perceived by players, and how is it perceived by the public? Because to me, that's the most important part. They read intent into what we do, and they read intent into the worlds we create. And I'm originally from Los Angeles, which you can see in the background, but if you're a little bit astute, you know that that's actually Los Santos from Grand Theft Auto 5. But it's close enough to Los Angeles, because they did a great job replicating the LA environment. So, lesson number 1, you need to embrace the passions that define you. When we're growing up, there's a lot of things that we are obsessed about as kids. And I'm sure you're all thinking about the things that you were so obsessed about when you were growing up and you really loved these things. And I have found that in my career path over the last many years is that those passions never left me. They have defined my whole career path, even to this day. So for example, I was 12 years old, starting with this, I was 4 years old when we landed on the moon for the first time in 1969. I remember, that's not me, but I remember doing exactly this. I was watching this event on my grandmother's black and white television set, and I remember it like it was yesterday. And it was just an amazing event. And so that really inspired me, and I thought, gosh, I'd love to work for NASA. I'd love to go into space. I wanted to be an astronaut so bad. And then another thing that inspired me tremendously a few years later was this, which you probably can't tell exactly what that is, but if I do this, you might be able to tell a bit more. It's the map of Middle-earth. I was introduced to Lord of the Rings when I was in elementary school, because back in the 1970s, the Lord of the Rings saw a huge resurgence, and a lot of people were reading it again. And so I just got completely captured by this world like everybody else. And this map is the reason I became a cartographer, because I was so inspired by the fact that you could use cartography to bring a fictitious world to life. And so I was really inspired by that. But it also helped that my brother and I, we had a globe that looked almost exactly like this one, and he would throw it at me often, because that's what older brothers do. But I just spent hours just looking at the globe and kind of fascinated. And I know a lot of people, I've never met a person in my life who said, I hate maps. Most people, especially as kids, we like to look at an atlas and kind of get lost in the maps we're looking at. So that was a huge influence. Middle-earth, cartography, and of course, Pong. That was my first video game, because I'm old enough to remember when this machine showed up at a store not too far away from where I lived. And so for those of us of that generation, it was utterly life-changing. It's like we had never seen anything like this before. If you've seen the movie 2001 where the monolith shows up and it makes the apes evolve, that's what this was for my generation. We became different people because now we had video games in our lives. So games have always been a part of my life since the beginning, and I love games. I love the fact that games are one of the oldest forms of human basically play. That's something that we've been doing since the beginning of human civilization. And there I am standing in the British Museum with the world's oldest known game from Babylonia that's being held hostage, being taken care of in the British Museum. And yeah, it's a great example. If you get a chance, I highly recommend you go see it because we even know the rules for this game, which is really fascinating. Another huge inspiration for me and passion was Star Wars, because I was 12 years old when the first film came out, and I cannot even explain to people who are not of that generation what it was like to go from nothing, no real, there was some sci-fi, but nothing like this. And all of our lives changed forever when this came out. And yeah, I was not there that day at the Chinese Theater in Hollywood. I went there about 2 weeks after it opened to be able to see it. And that inspired a whole love of my life, which is I love visiting filming locations. That's a huge passion of mine. So I've been to Tunisia, visited the original Lars Homestead. Off of Ireland, there's Skellig Michael, where they filmed the more recent trilogy. And there I am kind of, doing what we call shot syncs. And I was inspired so much by this activity that during COVID, when I was not traveling for 18 months, I actually created an app called SetJetter. So now I created a business so you can visit filming locations because it's something I love to do. So there's all these passions that have kind of driven my direction. And if you look at my career path, this is what it looks like. Now, astronaut and conceptual artist on Star Wars are gray because I did not do those things. They're things I aspired to do. I actually went to school for those. I did aerospace engineering. I did industrial design, but I ended up not going down those paths. But instead, I went down a very other strange path that has led me to where I am here. And all of that whole path was defined by all of those passions that you just saw. I kind of never let go of them. The second lesson I've learned is that the world is not ready for all your ideas. You have ideas right now percolating in your head that maybe you're holding them back for some reason, but the world may not be ready for them, but you should do them anyway. Don't let it stop you. Even if you have all these people around you saying, that's stupid, don't do it. But if you have that passion and conviction, you should try it anyway. So where I ended up as somebody who was passionate about cartography and all this other stuff. So, cartographers, what do? They take this object, which we're all familiar with, and we turn it into this to make a map out of it so it's better to understand what's going on the planet. And there I am a few rooms away from the game in the British Museum seeing the oldest map that we know that's also from Babylonia. So I was very passionate and am very passionate about cartography, and that's kind of what led me down this path. I went to grad school at the University of Washington in Seattle, where I am based. And in 1991, I wrote my master's thesis about using VR for cartography. This is back when VR hardly even worked. And I had all my geography professors like, don't do this. VR is just video games. They actually said that. It's just video games, so don't do it. But I was passionate. I said, no, I think this is a promising technology. I think we need to look into this, especially using VR to see how we can make maps that are more intuitive for people. I actually have, these are all images from my master's thesis done on my old Macintosh years ago. I was doing like augmented reality overlays. I was kind of simulating what it might look like if you're wearing the goggles. I even talked about using VR and AI to train AI and robots how humans view the world. So basically using eye tracking and all that to basically, we go out into the world, we point at objects, or we look at things, and they can help the AI understand how do we as humans perceive the world. But it was kind of not ready for its time. VR was not working very well back then. It works quite well now. But what happened? So I started pursuing this as a research path, but then Microsoft called the geography department, and they said, hey, we need a cartographer to help us make some maps for products. So I went over to Microsoft on a contract basis to create products, and these were the products I helped create: Bookshelf, Encarta Encyclopedia, and Encarta World Atlas back in the early 90s. And so that's what led me into Microsoft. I thought it was going to be a 6-month contract, but then they kept renewing the contract and said, hey, now we need your help on this project, and we need your help on that project. And I was making good money. I had just gotten married. I was a starving grad student. So I'm like, sure, I'm going to keep doing this. But it got so busy that eventually I put my PhD on hold because I just couldn't do everything. And so eventually they ended up offering me a full-time position. And I said, well, what do you want me to do? And they said, well, we need somebody to help us navigate all the geopolitical sensitivities on the map. So how do you show Taiwan? How do you show Kashmir in northern India? How do you show all these disputed areas of the world and boundaries? And I said, well, I can do that based on my background. So they said, go ahead and write your job description and we'll hire you into the job, which that doesn't happen anymore. So I called myself a geopolitical strategist, and I was the first geopolitical strategist at Microsoft, and so I was hired into that job in 1995. And so some of the things I had to deal with were things like this. So this is the map that I made for the early version of Encarta way back when. It's actually a bitmap, not vector. And this map is the reason why the general manager of Microsoft Turkey was thrown in jail, because we had the label Kurdistan on the map, which is a very problematic topic in Turkey. So basically the government said, take the label off the map or he's not coming out of jail. So this was one of my early experiences having to navigate these geopolitical sensitivities and how they affect information products, like an encyclopedia. So we took it off the map. We did not take the article out of the encyclopedia because we're not going to erase Kurdistan. And then the same year, India banned Windows 95 because of the time zone was highlighted. Because back in the old days in Windows 95, when you selected your time zone, it would highlight the time zone. It would show the whole time zone highlighted. Well, India is unique because it's half-hour time zone. It's not a full hour. And because it's a half-hour difference, the whole outline of the country is shown, as you can see here. But the government banned the entire product. Why? Because a few pixels were missing on their claim over the disputed area of Kashmir. So because these red pixels were missing, they banned the entire Windows 95. And so, of course, we had to fix this as well, which basically meant from this point forward, Windows will never highlight time zones ever again, which it never has since. So these are the kinds of things I had to deal with. And then 1997 rolls around. What happens? We have it in Encarta World Atlas, this problem where you can see on the left, that's the original border we were showing between China and North Korea. That lake up there that you see is a sacred place for all Korean people. And we're showing it completely within China. But the reality is the version on the right, you can see that the lake is divided in half by the boundary. That's the correct version. We got in big trouble with the South Korean government because of this. And so it caused the government to go through all of Microsoft's products looking for errors. And so we fixed a few things. We didn't fix everything because everything they said was not really an error. It was their political opinion. But that all quieted down. We thought it was fixed. Everything's fine. Well, then 3 months later, what happens? Age of Empires, the very first Age of Empires was released, and it contained some of the, quote, errors that the government wanted changed. And this product did not change them. Why didn't it change them? Because Age of Empires was made in Dallas, Texas by Ensemble Studios, and Encarta's made up in the Seattle area. They're, 2,000 miles apart. They have no reason to even know each other exists, and yet they all are within Microsoft. So that gave me an idea, because now we have a big problem with the company. We keep releasing content that is going to keep pissing off a certain government to the point where we might actually get banned in that market. And those two issues caused the Korean government to almost ban all of Microsoft products, not just the game and not just the Atlas. So what happened here in Age of Empires is that we had a scenario in the game where you see Japan in blue invading the Korean peninsula in red. Back then it was called the Chosun Empire in the Middle Ages. So we said, this is a great scenario. This is what really happened. So you as a player, you're going to play as the Chosun, and you're going to try and stop this massive Japanese invasion. We said, that's going to be a great challenge. So we put it in the game came out, and the Korean government banned it on day one. And why did they ban it? Because they said, this never happened. They said, in our history books, we were never overrun by the Japanese. They never invaded us like this. And we're like, well, that's interesting, because every history book outside of Korea says that you were. So what are we supposed to do? Well, this is a time when Microsoft is growing its business. It's trying to get into the game space. It's still pre-Xbox. The Xbox was kind of quietly being developed in the background. And we knew from market research, we have to sell this in Korea because they are a huge gaming market. RTS games, real-time strategy games like Age of Empires are super popular there, like StarCraft, which came out a year later. So we said, we have no choice. We have to release in Korea. So what we did is we released a patch only for Korean players, which changed history. So now Korea is invading Japan rather than the opposite. And of course, this created a big debate on the team about ethics and truth. You know, we are serving up government propaganda in order to sell the game into Korea, and that's exactly what we did. But that's a business decision that Microsoft made. It says, well, we have no choice. We either change the scenario or we just don't release. And it was not an option to take this out of the game. It was too late to do that. So that's what we did. Now, during this time period in the late 90s, Microsoft was under a tremendous amount of scrutiny. This is one reason why governments like Korea were so quick to go after Microsoft, because it was a huge debate. This is when the US government was going after Microsoft for being a monopoly, which they actually eventually did. The Department of Justice sued Microsoft for being a monopoly. And so we had all of these, cartoons and opinions in the public sphere going on at the time, that Microsoft has gotten too big, it's gotten too powerful, which, we've heard this before, right? We've heard this about Meta, we've heard it about Google and other tech companies. This is my favorite political cartoon. I love this one. But yeah, so that's the political and social climate under which all of this was happening. So we had to be extremely careful with all of these kind of issues, which is why this gave me the inspiration in 1998 to create a new team at Microsoft, which I called Geopolitical Strategy. And this was the mission, was basically to help the whole company coordinate geopolitical and cultural risk across all of the products, and this included all of the games. And that's the logo I created using the 4 Windows colors for the compass, and that's the United Nations blue in the background. So that was my old Photoshop way back when. So the lesson, those ideas that you have may not be ready, but you should try them anyway, because nobody had done this at Microsoft before. Nobody was trying to address this risk. I took a chance to do this. It took me 5 interviews with a VP at the company to get this group created. I went through the first 4. They rejected it. They said, yeah, it's an interesting idea, but it's really not, we don't need this. It was the 5th one who approved it in 2 minutes. And I think the main reason he was the only VP I talked to who was not from the US. He was from South Africa, so he instantly understood all of these issues I was talking about. So when I pitched my idea to him, he's like, let's do this. And the team was created on that date. So yeah, and that took 7 months of pitching to these different VPs. So lesson 3, culture does impact everything. Everything we do, everything we perceive, everything we are is impacted by culture around us. And so this leads me to explaining a little bit about the work I ended up doing once I created that geopolitical strategy team. Now I was formally doing what I call culturalization work inside the company. So when we look at the game context, what happens is that the game worlds that people create, like the worlds you're creating, I see how are the game worlds going to be compatible with local worldviews and local culture. So it's kind of like an interesting gene splicing exercise where the goal is to preserve the creative vision of the game, but make sure that the game is going to work in different markets, because most people I know who make games, they would love their game to be enjoyed by as many people as possible around the world. They really that's what they want. We don't want to say, we only want people in Europe to enjoy it. No, we want everyone to love what we do. And so I work in this zone where I'm looking at content assets that are either compatible or incompatible with the local markets. And that's a really simple way to look at what culturalization is. Here's a couple examples. This is what I call reactive culturalization, where we're looking for things that are potentially problematic or offensive. So this is from Fallout 3 that I worked on. And this is the whole reason why the game did not sell in India, because this is a 2-headed Brahmin bull, and the Brahmin bull is sacred to the Hindu faith. And there's actual laws in India that protect real Brahmin bulls from being harmed. And there was concern that those laws might be applied to this virtual representation of a Brahmin bull. And you can see it's not a very nice one either. It's 2-headed, it's mutated, it's radioactive. And so basically, we went back to Bethesda and said, hey, can we swap this out for something different, like my poorly photoshopped 2-headed horse? And they said, because a horse would have been totally fine, but not a Brahmin bull. But they said, no, it's too late. We're not going to make the switch. So because of that, that's the whole reason why the game did not release in India, just because of that one issue. But then there's also something we call proactive culturalization, where we're looking for ways to enhance the experience for a specific market or culture. So for example, when I worked on Temple Temple Run 2, they saw that they were having an increased users in Mexico. So they said, how about we do a special event for Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead holiday in Mexico. And what we did is reskin the game. We created the characters to make them look authentic and correct ethnicity. We put the different elements of the holiday into the environment, like the marigold flowers and the candles and everything. And this saw, once this was released, the sales went through the roof. They just saw this massive spike in sales in Mexico because people responded so positively. And this went so well that actually we did a version of the Holi holiday, the Festival of Colors in India, and it saw a similar result. So there is a way to use culture as a way to enhance the experience if you target like that. But we also have other challenges. So like there's things like allegory. So allegory, of course, is when we put something in our game that has maybe a hidden meaning. Like, for example, if we create a fantasy world, we're creating a culture in that world that might be based on a real world culture. For example, any fantasy game I've worked on that has a desert environment, what do the people look like? They look and sound and dress like the Bedouins from the Arabian Peninsula, almost always, no matter what kind of fantasy world it is. And that's an allegory. We do that because we want to convey to the player that these people live in this kind of environment. Well, on Halo 2, we had an allegory that was being developed that was not really intentional. So if you haven't played Halo, I have to set this up for you very quickly. So in Halo, you've got this alien group called the Covenant. It's a bunch of mixed race aliens. They are led by 3 leaders who are called prophets, one of whom is called the Prophet of Truth, which is an often used synonym for Muhammad. But I said, that's fine, because you could argue that Prophet of Truth could be used for any religious figure, not just Muhammad. So I said, Prophet of Truth is okay. What's the goal of the Covenant? Well, they are going to basically activate these halo rings, which are these huge installations in the galaxy, which are essentially weapons of mass destruction because they destroy all sentient life in the galaxy. And they're doing it for religious reasons, because when they do that, it activates what they call the Great Journey. So you've got a Prophet of Truth running the Covenant who wants to activate WMDs for religious purpose, and who's trying to stop them? A super soldier with an American accent, Master Chief. And so Master Chief is going to stop them with his American soldiers with him. And this is also the first game we're releasing after 9/11. The first major game title after 9/11. Now the challenge, okay, you can say, well, are people really going to pick up on that? Maybe not, but because of this one character, in Halo 2, they introduced this character whose name originally was Dervish. Now, Dervish, and the Dervish serves the Prophet of Truth. Dervish is a title from Sufi Islam. So now you're setting it up even more. You've got the Dervish serving the Prophet of Truth, activating WMDs, destroying sentient life, Master Chief, American, trying to stop them. And so I felt this is not going to happen. We cannot release a game like this. I actually tested it on some of my colleagues in the Middle East region, inside of Microsoft. And I didn't set it up. I sent them a paragraph and said, read this. And most of them came back and said, oh, I see a revenge fantasy, the US against Islam for 9/11. I'm like, thank you. So what we do is we have to break the allegory or create what I call allegorical distance. So the way we did that is we changed the name Dervish to Arbiter. I felt if we just change Dervish, that kind of breaks the allegory. It adds more distance. So it's a bit harder to see that whole association. And so that's why in the game, that character is called the Arbiter and has been the Arbiter ever since. And so we have to be really careful about subtle things like that. And so that's part of what I look for. Even on things like Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, I worked for over 3 years on this game. And my role was to help them with the cultural and historical accuracy and authenticity. So because they're using real world environments in Thailand, in Giza, in Egypt. They're using real artifacts, they're using representation of real culture. So I had not only my own skill that I was applying, but I brought in archaeologists to work on the game. I brought in geologists to work on the game. Part of the joy of this game is that my dad, he was a geology teacher for many, many years. So he ended up working on the game with me. That's him at the bottom of the credits. So that was a real cool that my dad and I got to actually work on a video game together. And for people way back in my past who said that geography skills that really don't have a place in the game industry. Yeah, well, who made this globe for the collector's edition? I did. That was my design. So yeah, you can find your place. So there's many things we have to think about when we do these culturalization decisions. We have to think about your values and goals. Like, are you willing to change your game or not for a certain government? And that's something you have to decide. The context in which content is generated is important, which means we all have bias. We're all from a specific language, culture, geography, but it's also why we spend so many years in school, because we try and overcome our bias and think beyond our own experience. But sometimes in the creative process, that bias will creep in. We think about the business strategy for the vertical, because companies like Sony and Microsoft, they sell a lot more than just games. They make other hardware, software, so they have to think about, if we make this one change, how is it going to affect our other business? The market strategy for the locale, because how you sell in China is a lot different from Saudi Arabia or Brazil or Germany. And the market strategy for a specific game type, because a first-person shooter, for example, is not played everywhere. It's not enjoyed everywhere. You don't see a lot of FPSs in Japan versus RPGs in Japan, which are super popular. And then finally, the changing geopolitical, cultural, social, and legal factors, because I think we all realized over the last several years that the world is an extremely dynamic place, and it changes very, very quickly. When this incident happened over 3 years ago, the game industry was caught off guard. A lot of companies that I work with had no idea what to do. They were like, we've got Russian content, we've got Ukrainian content, what do we do about this? And so it was a challenge for a lot of companies, because they have not really anticipated geopolitical changes actually affecting their content of their game and their players in this way. So it was really challenging for a lot of companies to deal with this. And the issue that's going on in Israel, it's the same thing. A lot of companies are struggling with this as well. And that's the kind of world we live in, where these events happen, and then we as an industry and we as companies, we as creators have to figure out, does this affect us? Sadly, I've already had to advise some clients on what to do about this mess, because just this simple declaration already potentially affects games, because, oops, what happened there? Oh, okay, never mind. That's just that side. We can move on from that. I don't want to see that anyway. So I'll tell you about one game that was quite an incident. I'll move through this pretty quickly. But basically, we had an issue in this game, Kakadu Chojin, in 2002 that involved one audio file that had chanting from the Quran in the audio file. Now, nobody caught it. Nobody stopped to say, what is this? What is this from? They just put it in the game because they said, oh, it sounds cool. So basically, they put it in the game, and this game was like a brutal, mature-rated game. It's kind of bloody, hand-to-hand fighting, And so basically, what happened, I told them don't do it, and they said, okay, we'll change it. We'll take it out, which they did. But they already had 75,000 units which were packaged and already going to the stores. And I said, well, you're going to recall those, right? They're like, no, that's expensive. I'm like, what do you mean it's expensive? You guys throw internal parties that cost more than that. But they said, no. You know what? We'll release it only in the US. And I said, there's like 10 million Muslims in the US. I mean, are you kidding? They said, don't worry about it. Well, 3 months later, we got basically a letter from the religious council of the Saudi Arabian government, basically addressed to Mr. Gates, because he was still CEO at the time, saying, basically, you've offended Islam. And so now we're in trouble. So it started becoming front page news in the Middle East, starting with Riyadh, going to Dubai, going to Cairo. It kind of became this huge issue that was started to explode for the company. Now, in context, I had been telling the games division to get on board with what I was trying to do across the company. All of the product groups of the company were doing the geopolitical, cultural checks like I had tried to get them to do, but the games were resistant. Robbie Bach, who was the VP at the time, great guy, he's just like, yeah, but games are okay. They're edgy and cool. We can be a little bit edgy. And I'm like, I don't know about that. But anyway, you could see like some of the reporters were not happy with Microsoft about what we were doing. So it started me having to go from Seattle to go to Copenhagen, which was the EMEA region headquarters for Microsoft. So I had to do some logistics there, go to Riyadh, where I went in front of a representation of the religious council, in which basically I had to confront them face to face and apologize on behalf of Microsoft for what happened. And that was a bit intimidating, I can tell you. I don't have time to go into that full story, but you could always ask me later. But basically, I said my apology after they had asked me all of these questions about what happened, which I couldn't answer. Like, they were asking me questions like, why did Microsoft open its first Middle Eastern office in Israel and not an Arab country? Like, I don't know. I mean, that's before my time. Why did Microsoft release Office 97 in Hebrew before Arabic? I don't know. Why did Outlook release the Judaic calendar before the Islamic calendar? I don't know. I wasn't involved in that. So basically, when they got to the question about the game, I had my apology ready. I apologized. They broke out into a furious discussion in Arabic on the other side of the table. And then they turned to me and just said, thank you for your time. And then I had to ask the Microsoft guys who were with me from the local office, what just happened? And they said, well, they were debating if your answer was sufficient. And I'm like, well, what would have happened if it wasn't? And they're like, we don't know. So I'm like, when is my flight leaving? So then I had to go to Dubai and do a little bit more of that, although Dubai is not quite as strict as, as Saudi. The thing is that because Saudi Arabia is the seat of the Islamic faith, we knew that if we do not do a proper apology there, then from that region and from other predominantly Islamic countries, they will follow Saudi Arabia's lead. So if they ban Microsoft products or they take action against the company, then a lot of the other countries will do the same. So we basically had to stop this in Saudi Arabia, and we did. Then to Cairo, and then finally back home. And then after I got back home, about 2 weeks later, Robbie Bach calls me up, and he said, hey, you know that stuff you've been telling us to do for a while? I think we should do that for all our games. I'm like, that is why you're paid as a VP. You're so smart. So we implemented what I call geopolitical quality review, which a lot of people internally call GEOPS review at Microsoft. And so I was doing it because I wanted to maximize our cultural respect of our players and the people who we're providing our games to. But really, that argument didn't work. Cultural respect, they're like, what does that mean? And I said, well, how about this? We want to maximize our global reach. So we want our games to go as many places as possible. So if we do this culturalization work, it actually helps our games go to more places, which means what? It means more money. And then they're like, oh, we want to do this. I'm like, I know you do. So finally, I've got to move on here. Lesson number 4, your true potential is found in adversity. And this is something that I've learned. This is a bit of a more personal point to mention. I was going through a lot of conflict with my own career. I don't know when it was, 10, 15 years ago. I think about 15 years ago. Now, at that point, I'd already been doing this work for a very long time. I'd done it at Microsoft. I'd left Microsoft. I was successfully doing it as a consultant. But I was really struggling with the fact that every single time I sent an email to a client, I was nervous that this is the moment I'm going to be outed as a fraud, that I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. And so what saved me from this whole cycle of doubt was The Matrix. So I will explain. So hopefully you've seen The Matrix. There's only one film, by the way, that came out in 1999. But anyway, I'm a huge film score geek. I love listening to music scores from film and games and all that. And so Seattle Symphony was doing a Matrix concert where they show the film above the symphony and you go listen to the live music. And Don Davis, who was the composer of the film music, he was there to conduct his own music. So it was really fun. So I'm sitting there in the concert hall with a friend of mine, and I'm watching this, and I've seen this film like 100 times, but I'm thinking about this struggle that I'm having internally. Like, why am I doubting? Why am I having these issues? And it gets to the point in the film where you see Morpheus in the dojo scene, and he says to Neo, we all know what he says if you've seen the film, don't think you are, know you are. And the moment he said that, I'm sitting there in the concert hall and I just start crying my eyes out because it hits me so hard, like really, really hard. And what it meant for me is that I realized that disbelief in my own skills does not make them disappear. Because people around you, you will doubt yourself, and people are saying, yeah, but you're so good. Look at your art. Look at your programming. You're awesome. But we just doubt and we hate what we do, and we despise our own work because we can't see the value in it, and we don't listen to the people around us who are telling us the value that we have. So you have to know the reality of what others perceive in you, even if you struggle to think you have those skills or not, because you do. Especially, I meet so many people in this industry who are in a job, doing the work in a company, and they still doubt what they're doing. And it's like, but you're working, you have a job, there must be a reason they pay you, I mean, you're there for a reason because you know what you're doing. And of course, we all know what this is. This is called imposter syndrome, which looks like this, where what you think you know is tiny compared to everybody around you. But the reality is that what you know is the same as pretty much everyone else. If you have a room full of artists, you have, like, say, 20 artists in a room, every single one of them is different. You all have a different life path. You all have different experiences which inform your art. So you all have a different style and technique. Now, maybe you look at somebody across the room and you say, wow, I wish I could do like what they do. I wish I had the ability to do that. It's like, well, guess what? You may have just found a mentor. Why don't you go ask them to help you do what they do? And of course, if you're looking at this and saying, well, gee, that looks like the Death Star, yeah, so don't think about the Death Star. Think about the nice flower. Don't think about imposters, you know. So one of the quotes I love around this topic is Mark Twain, the American writer, said that comparison is the death of joy. And I love this quote because I think it hits really hard today because so much social media, for example, and yeah, this is an old person talking pre-social media, I think it really optimizes comparison in a really negative way, where we look at what others are doing and we just get into this cycle of depression because we're like, I wish I could do that. I'm not doing that. It's just like, you have to break away from that. And like I said, if you see someone who might have better skills that you perceive are better, go ask them for help. See if they're willing to help you. That's one thing I love about being in this industry is how much we help each other so much. And so you really have to figure out how do you free your mind. And to me, when I was going through this crisis, it was basically embracing that adversity as your crucible. It's what changes you. It's as your forge. It's if you follow the writings of Joseph Campbell, who wrote The Power of Myth, he talks about the hero's journey. And he calls it the supreme ordeal, where the hero starts out as kind of a normal person. They go through some major crisis, and what happens? They come out the other side as a superhero of some kind. So you have to really embrace your superpowers, because I fully believe, after meeting thousands upon thousands of people in this industry, that every single person has unique superpowers in this industry. And so it's not a coincidence that around this time is when I really started doubling down on cosplay. So, yeah, that's me doing my Jane Foster Thor. A lot of my friends around this time, they said I somehow changed. And the word they said the most, they said, you seem fierce now. You seem like you're on fire. You don't seem to be inhibited. You don't seem to be shy anymore. Because if you believe it or not, I'm an introvert. And I grew up as a really, really shy person. But I'm standing before you as evidence that I broke out of this. And so, yeah, I really broke out of this. So this helps that my daughter is a costume designer. That's her on the right. So we have a ton of fun together. We'll be at San Diego Comic-Con next month. Anyway, that's a really powerful point I hope you take home, is that, you know, you have to embrace that adversity to free yourself and get beyond it, because that's how you really reach your full potential. And I felt I had reached that, especially after I left Microsoft and as I was becoming self-employed and kind of finding my path in this industry. And then the fifth lesson that I've also learned is to lead is to serve. So if you really want to be a leader in this industry, you have to be a really good servant, because that's really the best way to lead, in my opinion. You know, in other words, it's not all about you. And I think a lot of us know this, but putting into practice is really hard, and it does take practice. You know, so when I had reached a point in my career not too long ago, one of the people I consider a mentor, he asked me, he said, I don't know exactly what you do. So he said, I'm going to ask you to go back and think about, what are you? What exactly do you do? And so about 2 weeks later, he came back to me and said, so what's your answer? And I said, well, I think I'm a cultural change catalyst. I like to start the change of culture. So I started it within games, because I was doing the culturalization work on games, so trying to make the games better within themselves. I was trying to do it at game studios by helping them improve their process and be more respectful of culture and think about how it affects their game distribution and everything. And then I'm like, well, what's the next target? The game industry. I want to change the game industry because I think it needs to be better. I think we need to treat developers better. I think we need to support each other better, which is why I took on the roles of being executive director of the International Game Developers Association, of TakeThis.org, which focuses on mental health in the industry, and also the Global Game Jam. So it was fun. I spent a lot of time in those years while I was still doing my consulting work on the side, but I was trying to make a difference in terms of raising the voices of developers wherever I could. It was not easy because back during these times, there was the issue known as Gamergate, which was 10 years ago. And because I decided to speak out about a lot of these issues, Gamergate decided to make me one of their primary targets. And so for about 2 years straight, I was one of their primary targets. And so yeah, it was not, yeah, I'm sorry, moving on here. So yeah, they hated me. They really hated me. I got death threats and harassment for over 2 years straight from these people. I was in touch with the FBI in the US on a regular basis to discuss with them the death threats I was getting. You know, and I knew though that they were, you know, I didn't take them seriously because I knew what these people were. They needed to hide. It was not about confrontation. It was about just stirring the shit pot and making life miserable for people, you know, especially women in the game industry. So, so yeah, it was an interesting time, and it coincided. It kind of all started to quiet down when Trump was elected in 2016. Why? Because they said, well, our guy won. Our guy's in the White House, so now we won the culture war. But anyway, let's not get into that. Makes me depressed. But anyway, yeah, it was a challenging time to be leading an organization of that scale in this industry, but I'm glad I did it. And what was driving me on is this whole idea that evil triumphs when good people do nothing. And I take that very seriously, that we need to step up. Every single one of us needs to step up. If we see injustice, if we see a problem, if we see someone struggling, why not us? Why can't we step in and help them out? Even in a little way, just try and help them out, you know? And so that's why I get on stages around the world, and that's why I love to speak and to get out there and kind of spread that message here and there. Normally when I give a lecture, I'm just talking about my culturalization work. I'm not talking about all this, but and I still do it today. Like next month, I'll be at San Diego Comic-Con, because at Comic-Con, I run these game developer mentoring sessions. So anyone from Comic-Con can come in and get mentored by my colleagues from the industry who I recruit to join in as a volunteer. So these are pictures that we did recently. We have an event called WonderCon, which is in March, which is the sister event to San Diego Comic-Con. So yeah, there's the group of us doing our group picture in the background. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. So you know, anything we can do to help people out and to help them understand what it's like to work in this industry, even in a challenging time that we're in. So leadership really, to me, is not about social media. And again, that's the old person yelling at cloud. But I just don't find it effective. You know, and the fact that Black Mirror has several episodes about it kind of might give you the message that maybe social media really isn't the answer if you want to make a difference, if you want to make change happen. So it's really about action. So, you know, whose problem can you solve today? How can you elevate your team, you know, make them shine? You know, what strengths can you bring to the solution? Do you see something other people aren't seeing, and do you have the guts to say something about it? Are you willing to go with that gut feeling and maybe try to make something happen even if nobody else sees the problem? Because you might be the only one who sees it. So you have to be willing to try to reach out and do that. So, and you know, what positive change can you enable? It's like looking for the opportunity to make change happen. And I know we don't do this every day at every hour because we're all busy. We all have, you know, whether you have families or whether you have a lot of work or whether the situation is, it's tough. I know. I've been there. I have a daughter. She's an adult now, but I get it. It's not easy to balance all of these things. But I feel strongly that the industry and the world, we need to dare mighty things as individuals, both individually and collectively, but especially now because the world is really kind of in an interesting place for all kinds of reasons. So with that, I will say thank you. I think we might have a couple of minutes if there's any questions.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. Let's take a couple of questions. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. So first of all, I just want to say that I've been to lots of talks, lots of conferences, and I think this one is the most jaw-dropping. I think you've seen me standing here, that I was in awe. And one of my questions, at least that I can think of now, is how are you a real human being at this point? Like, how do you have, and this is coming from someone that is doing lots of things at the same time, but how do you have time? How do you balance doing all these things? I know it comes out of passion. I feel that too. Yeah. But how do you balance that in order not to get burnt out and to do everything you set out to do?
That's a great question. I mean, I can honestly say that everything you've seen up here, I love what I do. I genuinely love what I do. And I wake up every morning excited with that. I feel so lucky to be able to do what I do and to be able to help clients and help, you know, people in the industry, whether it's clients for my work or helping people I mentor a lot of people who are getting into the industry or who are in the industry. And I feel that's a privilege that I have to be able to do that. But, you have to find downtime. I mean, I travel about 75% of the year, which is a lot. But, as a geographer, it's kind of like, well, that's fun. That's what I do. You want to visit new places. You want to have new experiences, meet new people. And it's fun. But, as a baseline introvert, I need my quiet time too, my recharge time. So like I am so looking forward to going home on Saturday and having 3 whole days at home before I have to travel again. Because it's just, just the fact that I can go home, I have a routine. I don't have to really do anything other than just do some work. But you do have to find the balance. You have to. You got to find, especially among all of those passions. Like, for example, a lot of the advocacy work I've been doing, like being on different boards and all that, I've had to step off a couple of them over the last few years because between my speaking, between consulting, and between set jetters, I have like no time left. So I've really had to step back a little bit. And so you have to make those hard decisions. And it is hard because you really want to help. I'm a horrible person because I can't say no. So it's like people come to me, I'm like, sure, I'll help. And then you realize what you just said yes to. But you gotta, I think mastering the no is the most important thing. So. How much time did it take to find that balance? I don't know, 30 years?
We have another question here.
Hi, Kate.
Hi.
First of all, thank you for an amazing keynote.
Thanks.
You are amazing.
Thanks.
So I'm working on a startup on mental health, and I was wondering, because you've done amazing work at Take This org and so on, what's your take on the industry, on gaming industry, on mental health?
Well, I do think it's a lot better now than it was 30 years ago or even 10 years ago. I mean, certainly the awareness has exploded. I think COVID helped with that because, I mean, COVID had such a huge impact on a lot of people with their mental health, being cooped up at home, not being able to socially interact with people. So I do think a lot of companies got a lot more aware about what they're supposed to do about that, but I think they could still do a lot better. Because, I mean, obviously, it's both a company issue as well as a cultural issue from place to place, is the stigma around admitting that, hey, I'm struggling today. Because I still find it really weird that you can come into the office on a Monday with a broken leg and a cast, and what do people do? They're like, oh my gosh, are you okay? Can I help you in some way? I'll bring you coffee or bring you lunch or whatever. But if you come into the office on Monday and said, yeah, I'm just not feeling it today, I'm just kind of depressed, and people are like, well, maybe if you just work hard, you'll feel better. It's just, we don't know how to react to mental health issues like we do to a physical issue. And I think we need to be better at that and recognize that, if somebody says, I really don't feel I can do this today because of a mental health reason, we need to give them space just like we would with a physical, ailment. And I think we still need to get to that point and kind of have that grace for people who are struggling.
Thank you so much. We are, very packed today in terms of time. So thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you.
We'll